behind this building, waiting for an opportunity. They take their hat and they stick it around the corner, and their hat gets shot from the guys down the street. They're still like very active up here, shooting down anybody coming on the Cadwallader Street. So the Irishman, Joseph Rice, he wants to see how far the fire is from his house. He lives probably the second house or so from the corner here. So the one guy, a neighbor of his, Schaefer, probably German, I guess, he went up on the roof to see how far the fire was from the house, to see if they had to leave yet or not. But there's all this fighting outside. So Rice decided to peek out. And Hare was sitting there waiting for him, and just shoots him dead. And they say he dropped, literally just went, and his feet were still up against the fence when his wife found him. And wife and child, and very sad story. The wife and child sat there with his body all night, you know, into the next morning. You know, he was dead. He was pretty much dead instantly. So he's the only known Irishman who died. He's not the only Irishman who died, but the only known one. Joseph Rice. There was another Irishman who got killed, last name Johnson. And there was probably 11 or 12 other Irish who were killed, whose names are not known. They burnt, most of them burnt in the fire. They found two guys in a yard, bullet riddled, and they found another guy at the corner up here. He was shot dead, and no name was ever given for them. And then once the fires really start going that night and the next day, they found 7, 8 bodies in one house and several bodies in another house. About 13 or 14 Irish were killed and 8 nativists. So it's about 22 people, 24 people, somewhere around there. So after Albright and his men leave, because they got shot so bad, and after Hare kills this guy, they tend to leave also. And that's pretty much the end of the fighting for that Tuesday, May 7th in the afternoon. At that point, the militia, well, the Hare and them guys, and a lot of the natives left, but the militia finally showed up. They called out a bunch of companies, and I guess somewhere around 100, 120 men came to Kensington, and they had cannons, and they set up at Germantown and Master, Cadwallader and Master, like sort of like they set up over by St. Mike's, and they sort of like made a little rectangle in this area with men on each point with a cannon. And there was some challenge to them, but it wasn't much. And that was the end of the rioting on the second day. The militia finally took action. And there was a contemporary letter I found, a friend of mine owns, and the guy was saying in this letter, writing back home to someone, he was visiting Philadelphia, and he said that the militia, it didn't really seem like, they seemed like they were kind of like digging it, they kind of liked the fact that the Irish were getting killed and shot and stuff. That, you can imagine the militia was probably made up of Protestants as well at that time. All municipal offices were pretty much Protestant. So the militia really done nothing. When they showed up, and just their presence sort of stopped the actual street fighting and shooting, but they didn't do anything. The next morning, very early on Wednesday, May 8th, the mob started to come and see the destruction from the night before. Well, that night, when these buildings were lit, that whole block caught fire, and embers from there landed on the goat market, and the goat market also burnt down. So the mob came up and started milling about, and a lot of them were young kids knocking over chimneys that were still standing, this kind of stuff. And they would go to all these houses up here, some houses down here, these group of houses here, some places on 2nd Street, and they were searching the houses anywhere where the known Irish had been shooting from. And they were checking for guns and stuff like that. And sometimes they'd find people and beat them up, and they'd have to be rescued and things like that. And then usually when they left the house, they would fire it. So then the militia would come running over. But when they came running over, they would leave another area exposed. So the mob or the kids, a lot of kids, would go over and attack buildings there. And all this was going on. But before I continue on the third day, let me just go back to the previous day for a really bizarre story of a guy named John Taggart. He was an Irish Catholic. And Taggart was living right around here on Cadwallader in one of these homes. And when the mob came up and started battering the the fire hose company, and this big battle started shooting down here. Well, there was a lot of people milling about over here, near where Taggart lived. And because they weren't fighting him, they were just watching, he must have felt safe. He was an Irish Catholic. So he came out of his house, or wherever he was hiding, and he makes his way through the crowd with his rifle to shoot at the guys on Cadwater, the nativists, who were battering the hose company or hiding here or going up there. And the mob sees him, and they go to grab his gun, and a little scuffle, but they get him, and then he's like beat nearly to death. They beat him so bad, and then they decide they want to take him over to the alderman's office to jail him. So in the process of going over, he lived over here somewhere, I think Borleau. In the process of taking him over there, they stopped for a drink and locked him up outside. And while he's locked up, people are coming by, just giving him a whack and giving him a hit, and he's like totally out of it now. I mean, I think Boileau, the alderman, said that when he finally seen him, he wasn't sure if he was a white man or a black man. That's how badly beaten he was. And in this state, they still wanted him done. The mob took him from the little jail or whatever that's in the alderman's office and took him outside and strung him up on a lamppost. And apparently a good spirit in the mob stopped this, or he would have hung. But then they continued to beat him, and they drug him down to the market house that was on 2nd Street in Northern Liberty, between Fairmount and Poplar. And they left him in a stall down there. And mobs of people came walking by, looking at him, and everybody just assumed he was dead. Well, it turns out he wasn't dead. Someone saw a little bit of life in him, took him to the hospital, and he lived. He was maimed for the rest of his life, but he lived. And after he was able, they put him in prison. They got out of the hospital. And his trial, I guess, was like that fall after the riots. It was the fall of 1844. And the judge gave him time served, even though he's known to have killed one of the natives. He did murder one of the natives. So he was a bad guy in that respect. But they felt that the beating he had taken was so great that was, and a little bit of time served, that was okay. So let's jump again to the next day, day 3. So the mob's up here, and they're picking on the houses here, 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 and around here. And the militia, they're playing like a cat and mouse game all morning and afternoon. Where the militia would chase them, and when the militia left this place open, they would attack those houses. And around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the mob says, let's go to St. Michael's. And that's what they really wanted. They really wanted the church. So they came over to St. Michael's, and again, they did some fires in these houses right here. Some of the militia that was here went over there. The church was somewhat exposed. Someone snuck in the church, lit it on fire. The church burns down. It catches fire to the rectory next door. Catches fire to a manufactory and 4 or 5 other buildings on that block. That whole block goes up in smoke. They were in the cemetery, knocking tombstones over, just desecrating everything. And there's a story that there was a family, a mother and a father, burying a little baby in the cemetery at the time when St. Michael's was being burnt. And all the crackling of the wood from the fire drowned out the prayers of the family, the way it goes. And at this point, the priest at St. Michael's had fled with a military escort. Father Donahue, the original pastor of St. Michael's, he had previously moved to Iowa. The Sisters of Charity that had the nunnery, they still owned that building, but they went out to Iowa and set up shop there and left Kensington. And Donahue, it just so happened, had come back to Kensington to take care of the sisters' property, to sell it for them, and it got burnt down. But Donahue had left earlier. In fact, him and the pastor at the time, both were in the steeple at St. Augustine's downtown, watching St. Michael's burn down. And so after that scene there, the militia came, another group of militia, not the ones that were already stationed here, but another larger group of men came with Colonel Page, the state fencibles. And Colonel Page turns Jefferson Street, and as him and his men turn Jefferson Street, the posse, the sheriff's posse, is running north on 2nd Street with a gigantic mob chasing them. And so he had his men line up in formation, and he told the posse, get behind my men, and stuff like this, and he goes into the crowd. And, you know, it was very dangerous for his sake. But he got off his horse, and I guess he was a known character in East Kensington. And he was able to get them to calm down, you know, and not do any damage. And later on, actually, Fishtown, East Kensington, named there's a society called the Colonel Page Library. It was on Girard Ave at the Mechanics Hall. So he became a hero in that respect and helped quell the riot in Kensington. So after they got quieted here, the mob marched back down 2nd Street. And one story says that they went by St. Peter's Catholic Church at 5th and Girard, which at that time was still being built. And they said that the Germans, the German church, that were all armed, some with pitchforks. and that the mob decided they didn't want to fight Germans or something like that. Or maybe they just didn't want to fight armed Germans, I don't know. And so they left them alone. But it's another reason maybe that, you know, this was really an Irish Catholic, Irish Protestant battle from the old country, you know. Or why didn't they attack the Germans? You know? So they leave there, they go downtown to 4th Street, and the mayor of Philadelphia, well, now they come into the city. At that time, Philadelphia is only Line Street to South Street, river to river. That's the city of Philadelphia. Everything else is the county with districts and boroughs and townships and such. So they get down, the mob gets down to St. Augustine's, and there's some militia there, not a whole lot, and they're guarding St. Augustine's. And the mayor gets up on a wagon and is trying to calm the crowd down and tell them to go home, and they stone him. He gets hit in the chest with a big brick. So he leaves. And again, the militia was not adequate, and they had to scramble as well. And a kid went into the church and lit the church on fire. And they burnt down St. Augustine's with a very valuable library that the priest had. I can't remember the priest's name, but I think St. Augustine's might have been picked. It wasn't really an Irish Catholic church. I'm not sure if the French immigrants maybe founded that, or if St. Mary's was French. I can't remember that. But St. Augustine was burnt because the priest there, I think his name was Father Gearden or something like this, you know, he was kind of like the Catholic version of a Louis Levin. He was like sort of a rabid anti-Protestant, you know, Irish Catholic. And he later on went to Ireland, made a trip to Ireland to raise money to rebuild St. Augustine. So after the mob burned St. Augustine's, and miraculously the wind must have been blowing in the right direction, because I think only the rectory may be burnt, and the surrounding buildings didn't burn. It could have been a real catastrophe. You know? At this point, the mob is now in the city of Philadelphia, and so now you know, that's where the patricians, you know, the wealthy live. So now the militia is acting now. You know, the guard is acting. The army is want to pounce on the mob now, and the mob goes down to Old St. Joseph's and Old St. Mary's, which are about a block, not even a block apart, just around the corner from each other, 4th and Locust, right below Walnut. And the guard is down there guarding those churches. And they went over to St. John's on 13th Street below Market, and the guard was there guarding that church as well. They don't mention any guards around Holy Trinity, which is a German Catholic church. So maybe they have a beef with the Germans maybe. So that's the end of the riots as far as in May of 1844. Later that summer, I mean, I'll go through these images here. This is, again, from that same book, Contemporary of the Riots, called The Awful Riots. This is the Nanny Goat Market burning. This is the host company over here burning. The house is burning in that block, and the militia standing around. This is General Cadwallader, the head of the general of the militia. Funny because most of the rioting took place on Cadwallader Street. You know, so the street honored his family. He had to go quell the riot. This is just another map in the book. So it's a map of the 3rd day, and again, these are all in the book, showing all the various buildings that were burnt and stuff. The mob actually, after they burnt the church and all, before they went over to St. Peter's, or on the way to St. Peter's, they went over to Alderman Clark's house and destroyed it. Him and his brother had a tavern right on the corner, and Hugh Clark lived right next door. But they didn't burn it because Protestants lived next door to them. And so they just ransacked it. This is St. Michael's Church burning. Everybody had nice hats. There's the nunnery burning. Again, it's like kids, right? This is a shot, a contemporary shot from where the nunnery would have been, and you're looking down or up 2nd Street. Here's St. Michael's. This is the crane building, so the burn your hose would have been there, the nanny goat mark is here. And the reason I took this picture is this whole block here is an empty lot, except for one building. And that building stands on the empty lot where the natives had their riots. I thought that was kind of fun. Had to meet it. This is the aftermath of the riots, everything burnt down. Here's Hugh Clark's house and his brother's tavern, and these houses were destroyed in the riots. And, this is a map my friend Torben Jenk made, and it shows all the different courts and the property owners or residents of those properties, and all these properties were destroyed. There was about 3 blocks of houses, about 60 houses and businesses were destroyed, 2 churches, 2 rectories, the nunnery school, the goat market, the Hibernia Host Company. Lots of damages. The St. Augustine's is burned. So that's May of 1844.